hard to tell. I think by early 1945, the vast majority of the German population was very, very well aware that the war had been lost.
It had been 8 months since the Allies had landed in Normandy, France. U.S. troops had just suffered the winter of 1945 and the Battle of the Bulge. But by the end of winter, Allied troops were continuing their push into Europe. By March, the Western Front had been pushed across the Rhine. It was March 26, 1945, when the first U.S. forces crossed the Rhine into the war-torn city of Mannheim, Germany.
What amazed a lot of soldiers was the enormous destruction they saw both in Mannheim and in our neighboring city of Ludwigshafen. After all, both were important centers for the German arms industry, both were important industrial centers, and had seen very many aerial attacks during World War II. So the soldiers actually arrived in a city that was to a very large extent already in shambles, and where soldiers immediately realized it had to be rebuilt.
As the U.S. Army approached Mannheim with units from the 3rd, 44th, and 63rd Infantry Division, soldiers encountered little resistance. Within a few days, the city was controlled by the Allies, and soon proved to be a vital logistic hub for American forces advancing into Germany. Post-World War II led to the rising tensions between the Soviet Union and the U.S. Events like the Berlin blockade, the Korean War, and the tense Cold War years changed everything for U.S. troops in Europe.
And so the decision was reached to send no fewer than 4 extra divisions to Europe, and one brigade of one such division, it was called Combat Command Alpha 2nd Armored Division, ended up in Mannheim, namely in what is today Common Barracks. And that of course changed the whole picture, because now Mannheim ceased to be a dwindling logistics hub and became a major center of military activity for Americans in Europe.
Over the years, American forces would play more than a military role in Mannheim. Americans would help rebuild the city, influence German democracy, and impact the very culture of the Rhine-Neckar region.
War ich 9 Jahre alt, da war eigentlich meine Sorge, wie kann ich überleben, wo kriege ich was zu essen, zu trinken. Und da war Baseball für mich eigentlich der Garant fürs Überleben. Ich wusste, da wo Baseball gespielt wird, da wo die Amerikaner sind, da gibt's was zu essen und zu trinken.
By the end of the 1940s, most American troops realized the Army would be staying in Europe for many years. Temporary camps soon became military barracks, and soldiers began transitioning to living overseas. For a taste of home, they brought with them the American pastime. Norbert Jäger was just a child when he first saw American soldiers playing baseball.
Als ich zum ersten Mal Baseball mir anschauen konnte, dann war das für mich wirklich ganz fremd. Für Deutsche ist diese Art Ballsport zu betreiben also was ganz Neues. Und ich habe aber sofort gemerkt, dass es ein ganz intelligenter Sport sein muss, weil es so schwer war, die Regeln zu verstehen.
Mr. Jäger is credited by many as the godfather of German baseball. Over the years, he learned the game and with American soldiers and other Germans formed clubs. Throughout the 50s and 60s, he would play with the Mannheim Knights, the Cougars, and with national teams. By the 70s, Mr. Jäger was coaching Little League teams and passing on his knowledge of the game. With few German teams in the region, most games were played against military teams in the Mannheim garrison.
In den 70er Jahren, also über eine ganze Dekade, 10 Jahre vielleicht, intensiv ausschließlich mit den Amerikanern, mit unseren kleinen, jungen Baseballern gespielt, in deren Ligen.
By 1975, a new Bundesliga was being organized. Mr. Jäger already was working to start the professional team in Mannheim. The pro team would take the name of the Tornadoes, after the American Forces Ball team from the Mannheim garrison.
Und wie gesagt, erst 1975 waren die Tornados der erste deutsche Verein, der eigentlich nach deutschem Vereinsrecht gegründet wurde und den Namen verdient hatte, Baseballclub zu sein, ein richtiger Baseballclub.
The Mannheim Tornadoes would go on to win 11 championships between 1982 and 97. They are still recognized as the premier baseball team in Germany. The Mannheim military community would continue to grow and change with the times. Soldiers from Mannheim would take part in a number of international missions, from the Korean War to Operation Enduring Freedom. Although soldiers would come and go over the years, it was the civilian workforce that would remain a constant in the garrison. Some employees would spend half their lives working for the army in Germany.
To work over here for 30 years right now, it's hard to go away, right?
Throughout the years in the Mannheim military garrison, there have been welcome home ceremonies, special concerts, somber memorials, and gatherings of strength. Behind nearly every community event, there has been the civilian workforce. For the past 30 years, there has been Jürgen Thieme.
I never got one day what I can say by myself personally, I hate to be over here, never.
Jürgen started working for the garrison in 1981 as an electrician. He has supported military operations, 16 years worth of Albert Schweitzer tournaments, and even emergencies. His office is now cleared of tools and supplies as the barracks prepare for the closing of the garrison. In the coming years, the empty buildings where Jürgen spent half his life will be a hard reminder.
In the future, right, okay, when you pass these barracks, okay, and everything's empty, okay, they remind you about, what was before. I think this goes in my mind, okay, 7:30 in the morning, I start over here working, okay, and so I can remind me also, the specific things what I did, step by step, right? Okay, I mean, it's not what I can say, it's not go out of your mind, right? It's still in you, right?
Although the military community may have affected Mr. Thieme's life, he and hundreds of other German civilians made their impact on the United States Army garrison Mannheim. Six decades of soldiers, civilians, and family members. A military community reaches farther than just its strategic role. A garrison's influence touches the very lives of those involved with its activities.
You must imagine, we've had Americans in this town for 66 years. We've had American combat groups on German ground, West German ground for 66 years. These were probably the most peaceful, democratic, and prosperous years this country has ever seen.
Wenn man bedenkt, dass ich jetzt mit meinen 75 Jahren, die ich alt bin, davon 66 Jahre mit den Amerikanern gelebt habe hier in Mannheim, dann weiß man, dass es also seine Spuren hinterlassen haben muss.
I know that the relationship between the American soldiers and the Germans were very good, and many soldiers in the United States, when you meet them, they say, "Oh, Mannheim, yeah, I remember, it was a great time," and they really loved it here, and I understand why, because I live here now as a German American.
It was one of the largest communities in Germany for most of its existence, and a lot of people have lived here. A lot of people have connections here. A lot of people have friends here.
I think the city of Mannheim will certainly continue to welcome Americans, and I know that while we may not have U.S. forces stationed in Mannheim, we will continue to have several Americans here in the city, many that come back to see places where they used to be stationed.
Mannheim is going to be missed. It's going to be sad when the soldiers clear out and we leave Mannheim, but it's always going to have a safe or a nice warm spot in everybody's heart. And it's nice to know that if we do come back and when we come back to visit, we'll be welcomed with open arms.
But I think that Most of the soldiers would tell you that have been here in Mannheim and got out and learned something about the surrounding area, that they enjoyed being in Germany, that they saw a lot of things in Germany, that they felt that they had at least some experience of another culture. There's a very warm feeling in Mannheim for the Germans.
I think that we should all, anyone who is associated with being here from the time that the Second World War ended till today, should be proud to have not only served our country, but to also represented our country positively to the Germans as an example and a role model that they today have emulated.
I'd like to say thank you, first of all, just for making Mannheim a wonderful home for me, for my family. I've got several memories of the past 2 years that I will cherish for years to come.
Again, I can only repeat, hua and thanks for a job well done. This country and this town owe you a lot.